Two horror story about the hungry monster of the forest. Story 1. The Hunter and the Horrors of the Deep Woods. A group of hunters set out into the deep woods, determined to catch their prey. They were armed with guns and their wits, ready to face whatever challenges came their way. However, as they trekked deeper into the forest, they began to realize that they were not alone. Something was stalking them, watching their every move from the shadows. It started with small noises, rustling leaves and snapping twigs, but soon the hunters were facing something much more sinister. They began to see strange shapes moving in the darkness, their eyes glowing red like embers. As the night wore on, the hunters became increasingly paranoid and desperate. They knew that they were being hunted, but they couldn't see their attacker. Suddenly, one by one, they began to disappear, dragged away by an unseen force. As the remaining hunters realized they were being hunted by a group of feral creatures who had long adapted to the deep wood, they scrambled to fight back, but it was too late. The hunters were overwhelmed by the sheer number and ferocity of the creatures. They fought bravely, but their weapons were no match for the razor-sharp claws and teeth of their attackers. The forest echoed with screams of terror and pain as the hunters were torn apart. In the end, only one hunter remained, hiding in a tree as the creatures circled below. He knew he was next, but he refused to go down without a fight. With trembling hands, he loaded his gun and waited for the creatures to come for him. Hours passed, but the creatures didn't leave. They waited patiently, as if enjoying the hunter's fear. Finally, the hunter could take it no longer. He let out a blood-curdling scream and fired his gun wildly into the darkness. The forest fell silent. The hunter sat in his tree, trembling with fear and exhaustion, waiting for the creatures to return, but they never did. As dawn broke, he cautiously climbed down and made his way back to civilization, haunted by the memory of what he had seen. The hunter never spoke of his ordeal to anyone, knowing that no one would believe him, but he knew that the creatures were still out there, lurking in the deep woods, waiting for their next victim. And he knew that he could never return to the forest again, lest he be hunted once more by the terrors that lurked within. The hunter couldn't shake off the terror he experienced in the deep woods. Every night, he was plagued by nightmares of the creatures, their glowing eyes and bloodthirsty snarls. He became reclusive, avoiding people and any activities that reminded him of the forest. But despite his efforts to forget, the hunter couldn't shake off the feeling that he was being watched. He could sense something lurking in the shadows, following him wherever he went. It was as if the creatures had left a part of themselves within him, a dark stain on his soul. One night, as the hunter was walking home from the store, he heard a faint rustling in the bushes. He froze, his heart racing as he tried to locate the source of the sound, but there was nothing there. He told himself it was just his imagination, that he was being paranoid. But as he continued walking, the rustling grew louder and more persistent. He quickened his pace, but the sound kept pace with him. He could feel his fear rising, threatening to overwhelm him. And then, suddenly, it stopped. The hunter breathed a sigh of relief and was about to continue walking when he heard a low growl behind him. He turned around slowly, dreading what he might see. The creature was unlike anything he had ever seen before. It was tall, over 7 feet, with broad shoulders and a muscular build. Its skin was dark and leathery, covered in patches of coarse fur. Its eyes were a deep, piercing red, glowing with an otherworldly intensity. The hunter stood frozen, unable to move or speak as the creature stepped out of the shadows. It regarded him for a moment, as if deciding what to do, and then, with a sudden lunge, it pounced on him. The hunter tried to fight back, but he was no match for the creature's strength. It tore at him with its razor-sharp claws, drawing blood with each strike. The hunter screamed in agony, but his cries went unanswered. Just when he thought he couldn't hold on any longer, the creature suddenly stopped its attack and retreated into the woods. The hunter lay there, panting and bleeding, as he watched the creature disappear into the darkness. He knew that he had been given a chance to survive, but he also knew that the creature would be back. From that day on, the hunter lived in constant fear, always looking over his shoulder, always waiting for the creature to strike again. He became a shadow of his former self, consumed by his fear and paranoia. He avoided going out at night, afraid of what might be waiting for him in the darkness. But even during the day, he couldn't escape the feeling that he was being watched. He would catch glimpses of something moving in the corner of his eye, hear faint growls and rustling in the bushes. He knew that the creature was still out there, waiting for him. One day, the hunter couldn't take it any longer. He decided to return to the forest, to face his fears and hopefully put an end to his torment. He packed a bag with supplies and weapons, and set out into the woods, determined to confront the creature once and for all. As he walked deeper into the forest, the hunter's fear began to subside, replaced by a sense of purpose. He knew that he was taking a huge risk, but he also knew that he had to face his fears head-on. He was a hunter, after all, and he refused to be hunted. As night began to fall, the hunter set up camp in a small clearing, surrounded by trees. He built a fire and sat down, his weapons within reach, waiting for the creature to appear. He waited for hours, his eyes scanning the darkness, but there was no sign of the creature. The forest was eerily quiet, as if holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The hunter was starting to think that maybe he had been wrong, that the creature was just a figment of his imagination, when he heard a low growl coming from the trees. He tensed, gripping his weapon tightly as the growling grew louder and more menacing. And then, suddenly, the creature emerged from the darkness. It was not alone. Dozens of creatures, just like the one that attacked him, surrounded him, their eyes glowing in the firelight. The hunter was outnumbered, outmatched, but he refused to go down without a fight. The creatures attacked him, and the hunter fought back with all his strength. He fired his gun, swung his machete, but the creatures just kept coming. He was knocked to the ground, his weapons taken from him, and the creatures began to tear at him with their claws and teeth. The hunter felt his strength fading, felt himself slipping away, when suddenly there was a blinding flash of light. The creatures recoiled, screeching in pain as a figure emerged from the trees, holding a crossbow loaded with silver-tipped bolts. It was a hunter, like him, but one who had dedicated his life to hunting down these creatures, these abominations that lived in the deep woods. He fired his crossbow, taking out the creatures one by one, until the last one lay dead at his feet. The hunter lay there, bleeding and battered. As the other hunter approached him, he was too weak to speak, too weak to fight back as the hunter treated his wounds and tended to him. Days passed, and the hunter slowly recovered from his injuries. He learned from the other hunter, who taught him how to hunt these creatures, how to track them, and how to kill them. He learned that these creatures were not just mindless beasts, but intelligent beings with their own culture and hierarchy. Together, the hunters explored the deep woods, searching for the creature's lair. They fought many battles. Some they won, some they lost, but they never gave up. Finally, after months of searching, they found the creature's lair. It was a dark, foreboding cave, hidden deep within the forest. The hunters entered the cave, their weapons at the ready, and engaged in a fierce battle with the creatures. The battle was long and brutal, but in the end, the hunters emerged victorious. The creatures were dead, and the deep woods were safe once again. The hunter who had been attacked by the creatures knew that he would never be the same again. He had faced his greatest fear and come out the other side, stronger and wiser. He knew that the deep woods held many dangers, but he also knew that he had the skills and knowledge to face them. And so, he continued to hunt, to explore, and to live his life to the fullest, knowing that the horrors of the deep woods were always lurking just beyond the tree line. Story 2: The Terror in the Woods. The four friends had been planning their camping trip for months. They had scoured the internet for the perfect location, and finally settled on a remote clearing in the heart of the forest. They arrived at the campsite in the late afternoon, just as the sun was starting to dip below the treetops. The clearing was idyllic, with a small stream running through the center and tall trees providing shade and shelter. They set up their tents, built a fire, and cracked open a few beers to celebrate. As night fell, they huddled around the fire, telling ghost stories and roasting marshmallows. The forest was quiet, except for the occasional hoot of an owl or the rustling of leaves in the breeze. As the night wore on, the friends retired to their tents, exhausted from the long day of hiking and setting up camp. But just as they were about to drift off to sleep, they heard something moving in the woods. At first, they dismissed it as an animal, maybe a deer or a raccoon, but as the sound grew louder and closer, they began to feel uneasy. Then they heard it, a low growl, just beyond the trees. They froze, unsure of what to do, as the growling turned into snarling and snapping. It sounded like something was circling their campsite, stalking them in the darkness. They huddled together, trying to stay calm, but the fear was palpable. They knew they had to get out of there, but they were miles from the nearest town and had no way of calling for help. Then, suddenly, there was a deafening roar, and a massive creature burst into the clearing. It was unlike anything they had ever seen. A hulking beast with razor-sharp claws and teeth like knives. The friends scrambled to their feet, running in every direction as the creature chased after them. They could hear its heavy footsteps, feel its hot breath on their heels, and they knew that it was only a matter of time before it caught them. They ran blindly through the woods, branches whipping at their faces, tripping and stumbling over roots and rocks. They could hear the creature gaining on them, could feel its hot breath on their necks. One of the friends stumbled and fell, and the creature pounced on him, tearing at him with its claws and teeth. The other friends tried to fight it off, but they were no match for its strength. In a matter of minutes, the creature had killed them all, leaving their bodies strewn across the forest floor. The next morning, a group of hikers stumbled upon the grisly scene. They found the shredded tents, the abandoned campfire, and the torn bodies of the friends. Rumors spread quickly about the monster in the woods, the creature that had killed the four friends in the dead of night. People whispered about it in hushed tones, warning each other to stay away from the forest at all costs. But the truth was far more sinister. The creature that had killed the friends was not a wild animal or a monster from the depths of the forest. It was something far more terrifying, something that lurked in the darkness, waiting for its next victims to stumble into its grasp. And so, the legend of the creature in the woods grew. as more and more people disappeared in the heart of the forest, never to be seen again. The once idyllic camping spot became known as the place where the forest claimed its victims, where the horrors of the woods came to life. Years passed and the legend of the creature in the woods only grew stronger. It became a rite of passage for local teenagers to venture into the forest, daring each other to spend a night at the site of the friend's grisly demise. But few ever made it back out alive. The creature had grown smarter, more cunning, and more bloodthirsty. It had learned to stalk its prey silently, to pick them off one by one, and to disappear into the forest without a trace. The locals whispered about the creature in the woods, telling stories of its glowing eyes, its unearthly howls, and its insatiable hunger for human flesh. And yet, the tourists still flocked to the area, eager for a taste of adventure and the thrill of the unknown. One such group of tourists was a family of 4, a mother, father, and 2 young children. They had heard the rumors about the creature in the woods, but they dismissed them as local folklore, something to spice up the camping trip. They set up their tent near the site of the friends' deaths, eager to explore the surrounding wilderness. But as night fell and the forest grew dark, they began to hear strange noises, rustling in the undergrowth, and the snap of twigs underfoot. At first, they tried to ignore it, convincing themselves that it was just the wind or some nocturnal animal. But as the noises grew louder and more persistent, they began to feel uneasy. Then, in the darkness, they saw a pair of glowing eyes, staring at them from the edge of the clearing. The eyes were like nothing they had ever seen before, piercing and otherworldly, with a hunger that seemed to emanate from within. They tried to pack up their belongings and flee, but it was too late. The creature was upon them, its claws tearing through the canvas of their tent, its teeth gnashing hungrily. The family fought back as best they could, but it was no use. The creature was too strong, too fast, and too hungry. In a matter of minutes, it had torn them apart, leaving their bodies strewn across the clearing, just like the friends so many years before. And so, the legend of the creature in the woods continued, growing stronger with each passing year. The locals warned tourists to stay away, but few heeded their warnings, eager for a taste of adventure and the thrill of the unknown. But the creature in the woods was always waiting, always hungry, and always ready to claim its next victims. And as the years turned into decades, the once idyllic forest became known as a place of unspeakable horror, a place where the dead never rested, and the living never returned. As the creature devoured the family, its unearthly howls filled the air, chilling the bones of anyone who heard it. The sound was like nothing they had ever heard before, a primal scream that seemed to echo through the forest, sending shivers down their spines. The creature was relentless, tearing through the tent with a ferocity that defied explanation. Its claws were razor sharp, capable of cutting through flesh and bone with ease. Its teeth were jagged and serrated, designed for ripping and tearing. The family's screams were drowned out by the creature's howls, drowning them in a sea of terror and pain. They begged for mercy, but the creature was deaf to their pleas, driven only by its insatiable hunger. As the night wore on, the creature's rampage continued, spreading fear and panic throughout the forest. It seemed as though nothing could stop it, that it was invincible, unstoppable, and eternal. But as the first light of dawn began to filter through the trees, the creature suddenly stopped its attack. It looked up, sensing something in the air, and then disappeared into the forest, leaving behind nothing but destruction and death. The family's bodies were found the next day, torn apart beyond recognition. The locals shook their heads, murmuring about the foolishness of outsiders and the dangers of the forest. But the legend of the creature in the woods only grew stronger, a warning to all who dared to venture too deep into its domain. It was said that the creature could never be killed, that it was a force of nature, a manifestation of the forest's dark and ancient power. And so, the forest remained a place of terror and dread, a place where the dead walked and the living feared to tread. And as the years turned into centuries, the legend of the creature in the woods became a myth, a tale told by firelight on dark and stormy nights, a reminder of the power of nature and the horrors that lurk within it.